We are halfway through the year, and there have been a ton of albums released in 2023. It's been super, super busy. This summer has been ultra busy. So many albums released, so many albums still on the way here in 2023. Willie, now that we're halfway through the year, what are maybe some of your albums of the year so far?
So far, I'll start with one. I'll throw one back to you, and we'll trade a couple off. I've got three off the top of my head that I think, for me, stand a little bit of a cut above, at least at the moment. There's still half a year left. I may not like him as much come November. First one, Dwayne Betts just came out. Dwayne Betts,
Wild and Precious Life.
Precious Life. Yeah, it's, and perhaps I'm biased because of the type of blues he plays.
Well, you were a really big fan, if I recall, of that last Allman Betts Band album.
Yes,
and this album, if you're a fan of that album, the Allman Betts Band, you're really going to like this album.
Exactly. It's a continuation. There's some differences, so it's nice. It's a change of pace, but you still get a lot of that same feel. It's one of those albums that makes you feel that part of America. It feels like the Southeast. You feel the mugginess. They do some of the old, when I say old, harkening back to the old Allman Brothers runs in certain musical structures. If you're into that, some of it's jazzy, some of it's more country. There's blues interludes. It's a great mix. It's like I said, come November, it might not sit as well. It is certainly a wonderful album for the summer, for all the heat we're having. It fits well with this oppressive heat. It takes the edge off it. It's a pleasure to listen to. Pete, I'm going to trade one back with you. What's one you want to throw at me?
All right. So right now, I would say one of my favorite albums of the year so far is I really liked the Blood Brothers album, Mike Zito and Albert Castiglia. Over the years, those guys have put out a lot of music. And in recent years, both of them have been putting out some really good music, as far as their solo careers. But joining together on this album, it was produced by Joe Bonamassa, Josh Smith. These guys really have a genuine chemistry, and you can really feel that on this album. It's filled with really good songs, great playing, and these two together, it just fits. It feels good. They're a really good combo. So I like that album. Another album that I really like so far this year that I don't think a whole lot of people have heard is Tears You Hide by Jeremy Albino.
Okay.
And Jeremy Albino, we've had him on the Blues Rock Show before, but he is like a really, really underrated artist. A couple of years ago, I had a chance to see him at Summerfest. It was actually the same festival that I saw Hannah Wicklund for the first time. And he really impressed me when I went to that festival. And he's not like one of those shredding guitar players, but he writes really good songs. He's got a really good backing band. And it's kind of blues rock that's danceable. And there's not a whole lot of what I would call danceable blues rock out there. It's very accessible blues rock. And so I would definitely go check him out. I liked his album a lot this year.
When you're talking, as soon as you mentioned Tandem, it made me think of what was going to be anyways an album that I was going to mention. So it didn't necessarily prod me into this. But the other one I thought of, people who have worked alone for so long and then teamed up, maybe not quite as natural a pairing as Zito and Castiglia, but Samantha Fish and Jesse Dayton on Death Wish Blues. We got to speak with Jesse Dayton. He was on the show, and I believe we asked him just how did this come about? Because you take a look at the two of them, and they aren't naturally maybe the people that you would think that would collaborate. But to me, that's what makes it such an interesting album, is you get two different styles, and then not just the styles themselves between the disparity between how each one of them plays, but then they get together and take it a step further. The back half of that album has some really interesting songs and I don't know if I'd say accessible, but I would say almost odd or weird, but in a good way.
It's a very unique album. It's a bit
Yes.
different from what
Yeah.
you would normally hear, but it definitely has a uniqueness to it. That's for sure, Willie.
Yeah, that's what I thought too, Pete. I thought, and because we, there's so many people looking at how can you expand this music to make it more accessible or interesting. And I think on a couple of those tracks at the end, they get into some songs that you wouldn't, if they weren't on that album, you would not classify them as blues or rock or blues rock. You'd say, I don't know what this is. So that's another album. And then I think the last album I'll mention that I just thought was solid, straight through, very heavy, as they're known for. I thought the Rival Sons' Darkfire was pretty darn good. And I was expecting it to be, so no great surprises. I don't know if it is the album of the year, but I think it was pretty good, and I've enjoyed that a lot too. Pete, you got anything else you want to throw into the hat?
Yeah, I did really like Tales of Time, which is Joe Bonamassa's live album. I think
now, does that count? Because that's a live album.
It's a live album. So this is not an album like at the end of the year when we do the top 20 albums of the year. It's not an album that will be on that list because that list is not for live albums.
Right.
However, I really, really like this album, Willie, and I think you know that I was a big fan of Time Clocks.
Yes.
And so Tales of Time features a lot of live performances of the songs from Time Clocks. And I saw Joe live in concert about a year ago, and he played a lot of these songs from Time Clocks that appeared on Tales of Time. And I've seen Joe in concert about a handful of times. And this was probably one of my favorite concerts that I've been to. And he played a lot of the same songs in a similar way. So was really, really impressed with that live album. So that one definitely sticks out to me as well.
Yeah, I took a listen to that, and I was very impressed on how well those songs translated live. And so when I said that's not going to be on the list, I was just giving you a hard time. We all knew that it's not on the album of the list, but otherwise it certainly could be. It immediately made me think of a couple of years ago, Kenny Wayne Shepherd came out with a live album that was tremendous. It has that same sort of raw but polished, and I know that's a bit of a juxtaposition, but a raw but at the same time polished sound. And not just Joe himself, but I remember thinking about how wonderful the backup singers were on some of the songs. Yeah, I agree with you on that, Pete. If you haven't heard that song, I'm sorry, not that song. If you haven't heard Time Clocks, you got to check that out. And if you heard Time Clocks, then take it the next step and go ahead and listen to the live version, which is every bit as good and add some new wrinkles in there. So I don't know, Pete. We still got half a year left.
It's pretty difficult right now, Willie, because so many albums have come out this year. And I think because of the pandemic, and this is the first summer where everything is like 100% open and there's not really all the restrictions in place and things like that. I think there's a lot more music being put out this year. And honestly, it's kind of hard to keep up with all of it right now because usually every year, things start to pick up in April. May is traditionally a very busy month where there's lots of album releases. June and July, there's still releases, but it tends to start slowing down a little bit. Like this summer, Willie, has been like relentless. Like every single month, it's just an abundance of album releases. And it's pretty hard to keep up with everything right now. So I mean, as a consumer, as a music fan, that's a good thing because there's a lot of good music coming out. So once we get to the end of the year, it's going to be really interesting to see which albums end up making the top 20 list because this year, I mean, there is so much competition.
Yes, there is.
What do you guys think? What are your albums of the year so far? Let us know down in the comments.